Real Country 1430 AM and 107.3 FM WRDN. Good morning. I'm Brian Winnikins. This is the WRDN Morning Farm Report. Joining us this morning, Brian Kuehl. He is Executive Director of Farmers for Free Trade. Farmers for Free Trade at the American Farm Bureau's annual convention the recently wrapped up convention. And thank you to Osseo Plastics, also 24/7 and West Wisconsin Telecom, Annabis Silo, Animal Wellness Center of Buffalo Valley, Compeer Financial, and also Countryside Co-op for helping with our broadcasts. And Brian, thank you for joining us today. Well, we have a new administration coming in for the upcoming year. And I bet Farmers for Free Trade is hoping that some of these outstanding tariffs and that sort of thing will finally come to an end.
We certainly are hopeful. I think, we don't want to get everyone's hopes up too high, though. I think it's going to be a process. We don't expect that the Biden administration will come in and instantly lift the tariffs and everything will go back to pre-trade war. But we're hopeful that over 2021 and into 2022, we'll see a gradual thaw of some of these relationships that really got hammered pretty hard.
Is there a hope with the organization that there might even be a little bit of warming and maybe trying to get back into what was once called the TransPacific Partnership?
We certainly hope so, and we're advocating for that. We've talked to the Biden transition team and encouraged them to think about that. I think there's a lot to unpack in that conversation. As your listeners may recall, the TransPacific Partnership trade agreement that President Obama had negotiated with 11 other Pacific Rim countries. American Farm Bureau projected it would have boosted American farm revenue by $4 billion per year. Unfortunately, on President Trump's second day in office, he pulled us out of that trade agreement. The other 11 countries that were part of that trade agreement, they continued on and they've set up their own trade pact without us. So we're going to have to ask them to join it. And it's unclear whether President Biden would want to join on the terms that President Obama had negotiated or whether he'd want to reopen some issues. So a little unclear where that unfolds. But yeah, we got to play bigger in Southeast Asia. A lot of growing markets there.
Meanwhile, over in Europe, Brexit is official. So now not only do we have the European Union, but then we also have Great Britain. Is that going to provide opportunities or challenges?
Probably a little bit of both, though I'd say more on the opportunity side of the ledger. The EU has been pretty recalcitrant on U.S. ag exports. And by that, I mean, everything from GMO issues to pesticide to defining products as being from a particular area. And that's made it really difficult for us to export. I think we have a new opportunity with the UK to renegotiate some of those issues and maybe with that then leverage those issues back onto the EU as well.
I know for dairy with the geographic indicators, that's a pretty big issue. So is that something that we have to work out, again, with Great Britain first and then be able to go back to the European Union and say, look, you gotta drop this because this is crazy?
I think that's most likely the path that will be taken is a negotiation with the UK and then potentially with the EU. The other issue that we watch with the EU is that the EU, by drawing these lines in the sand on things like the precautionary principle and geographic indicators, they in essence export those standards around the world. So then when we go to try to have a negotiation with another country, if they've already entered into a trade agreement with the EU, they have a standard that they want to adopt, and it makes it very difficult for us. So it's important that we make some changes on these issues.
Talking with Brian Kuehl, he's Executive Director of Farmers for Free Trade this morning. Brian, let's talk about the USMCA. That has gone into effect. Again, for dairy, the dairy industry is kind of pleased that at least the Trump administration had moved forward with some enforcement issues regarding Canada and how they were still dealing with dairy, which seems to always have been a problem. What's your take on that?
Well, yes, I think that is one of the bright spots of USMCA. Farmers for Free Trade lobbied very hard in support of the USMCA. We ordered the motorcade for trade, or organized the motorcade for trade, drove through 30 states holding events in support of USMCA. And we did that primarily because of the importance of the trading relationship with Canada and Mexico. They're both, our number one and number two trading partners. So it was essential that we had a good trading relationship. USMCA really built on the back of NAFTA, which was a good trade agreement. USMCA kind of updated it. But the one place where I think the Trump administration really made some progress was in the dairy space with respect to USMCA. And I think the big issue now is enforcement. Can we hold the Canadians to the commitments they made? And I think that's got to be job one of the Biden administration.
Is there a concern that with this enforcement, it might start to maybe not so much unravel the agreement, but start to get into another tit for tat type deal?
That's always a risk, I think. The USMCA does have dispute resolution mechanisms. So to the extent that Mexico or Canada aren't living up to their end of any of these bargains, or for that matter, if the US isn't living up to our end of a bargain on a commitment we made, there are ways to get into dispute resolution without having the whole relationship blow up. And that's the benefit of free trade agreements generally, is you get away from the, let's whack each other over the head with a club mentality and get to the, let's sit down and discuss this and figure out how we move forward, which I think provides much more certainty for business that has to plan and make capital commitments.
Talking with Brian Kuehl, he's with Farmers for Free Trade this morning. Finally, Brian, there was a lot of talk from the Trump administration of leaving the WTO, and there's been a lot of issues with that. There's some that say, there does need to be some potential reforms for the WTO. Is those reforms something you'd like to see the Biden administration maybe look at?
Absolutely. I think there's no question there have to be some WTO reforms. But at the end of the day, and I think critical for all of your listeners to understand, if you are a farmer or you are in food and agriculture, number one, you depend on trade. 20% of farm revenue comes from exports. So we need exports. The only way we maintain the level of exports that we have is with an international rules-based system. You have to have rules, you have to have dispute resolution, and that's what the WTO is. So if you're a farmer, you can't be in support of blowing up the WTO. It might feel good on one level. You're like, yeah, let's get those internationalists or those globalists. But hey, be careful what you ask for, because it's the WTO that allows us to have free trade, allows us to export our commodities, allows us to know that if a country that's in the WTO does something wrong, we've got a dispute resolution mechanism. So while adjustments and fine tuning is definitely needed, I think WTO is critical, and we hope the Biden administration will invest in that organization and really help it be a strong organization for the next 20 years to come.
Brian Kuehl, he is Executive Director of the Farmers for Free Trade. You're listening to the WRDN Morning Farm Report.